within a few words, he said, Silbury Hill's collapsed.
This is one of the strangest yet brilliant letters I've ever read. Its author, for a very brief moment, believes he's going to solve the mystery of Silbury Hill.
This isn't a grave, this isn't about money, this isn't about treasure.
Drax was 82 feet down a shaft inside Silbury Hill when that letter was written. He was right. Something extraordinary was about to happen. A cavity would open up underneath the miners, directly below them in what Drax would describe as a bottomless pit.
For a start, their candles go out.
Drax believed he was on the edge of a really important discovery right here, but there was a problem. Drax would not be the last person to think this. Over the next 200 years and more, people would repeatedly dig their way into Silbury Hill, shafts, tunnels, more tunnels, in search of answers.
But again, this is one of those myths that nothing was ever found at Silbury, but I mean, couldn't be further from the truth.
Every generation believed they were going to solve the mystery of Silbury Hill, and yet none of them would find what they were looking for. And yet, in a bizarre twist of fate, eventually the tunnels themselves would reveal a secret far greater than what any of them would have expected. Welcome to the story of the lost tunnels of Silbury Hill. Right, if you wanted to discover the secrets of Silbury Hill in 1776, well, there was only one way to do that, and that was to get to the middle. And Edward Drax intended to get there by digging straight down from the summit. Well, today that sounds like a really bizarre thing to do, but that was believed back then to just be a burial mound, just a bit bigger than the ones we normally see around here. And well, if we want to understand it, we need to get to the middle, because we're going to find a king or treasure or a tomb or something. Aided by miners from the Mendips, Drax began one of the most ambitious excavations ever attempted on any prehistoric monument. There were no archaeologists, no sort of careful excavation techniques. This wasn't about that. This was simply about driving a shaft down from the top as far down as we can go.
Drax put a invitation to a subscription on the front page of the Bath Chronicle. I don't doubt at all that the Duke of Northumberland subscribed, and probably heavily, but the truth of the matter is that Edward Drax is extremely wealthy. What makes this story so unusual is that we can follow Drax's thoughts as his excavations unfold, thanks to letters rediscovered by Brian Edwards. It was a strange sort of encounter, really, after 10 years. That you finally get to see something in his own hand. We get a rare glimpse into the mind of a man who genuinely believed he might be on the verge of a major discovery. There was always some confusion about where the miners that he employed had come from, whether it was Cornwall or the Mendips, and it was the latter. We could work out things like the rate of descent. You knew how many people were down the hole at any one time. Drax describes the fact that it was really dangerous after they got down just a little way, and so they had to shutter the hole. Now, at first, well, the dig was a huge disappointment. They sunk this shaft 50 feet, 60 feet, absolutely nothing. Drax even joked when writing to the Duke that he'd just found made ground, just chalk, but that was about to change. But on the way down, they then hit a void, which they're a little bit confused about. For a start, their candles go out, and so there's some form of gas present which has knocked out the candles. A narrow cavity just 6 inches across appeared below them, descending into the darkness. Drax wrote it appeared bottomless. The cavity sat in the very centre of the hill. It descended vertically down, and in his words, it was a matter of astonishment. You can almost feel his excitement through the letter. I mean, Drax had a reputation, and partly because of the Duke of Northumberland, of being a treasure hunter. But of course it wasn't moneyed treasure he was after. He couldn't possibly be more rich than he was already. When we came to the depth of 95 feet, he wrote, we struck upon a thing which I am sanguine enough to hope will lead to a great discovery. Drax believed he was close, really close, but there was a problem. He never properly published the excavation. All that remains were fragments, letters, memories, claims. Well, 70 years on from Drax's investigation, another group of investigators wanted to get to the middle of Silbury Hill, but instead of digging down that shaft, they decided the best way to do this would be to dig in from the side.
1849, Dean John Merewether took over a dig already underway by the Archaeological Institute on Silbury Hill, the most ambitious it's seen as yet. Now, whatever we think about Drax and his 1766 dig, whatever it was for, well, this one by Merewether is not treasure hunting. Archaeology was slowly becoming a discipline in its own right, and there was growing interest not just in finding things, but also understanding monuments themselves. So the plan here was really simple. We're just going to bury in or mine in from the side. Now, within just a few months, they've made some significant progress. 88 yards. Now, have a look at this image I've got right here to show you. Okay, so this is just the best image ever. This is an original 1849 image found by Heather Sabia.
But the other thing was, I found a copy of a drawing by Canon Jackson from the 1920s, which was a copy of a drawing made by the Reverend Lucas in 1849, and it appeared to show the collapse in the summit. The original drawn by Lucas had gone missing.
But also, well, we're seeing the proper full-on cross-section. We're seeing how far in now we've gone, probably past the centre according to this diagram. We can see various layers here. This shows us so much. But there was a problem. The drawing had survived, the notes that went with it had sadly not, which means that one of the most important records ever created inside Silbury Hill remains frustratingly incomplete. So once again, this story of this particular dig ends just as it's getting interesting. We don't really know what they found, and as they were digging through, to a degree, well, a whole nother mystery is resurfacing. What exactly had Drax found back in 1766?
Some locals are interviewed. They say that, oh yeah, they dug down to the bottom and they found a man. But of course they didn't. Colt Hoare says they describe what they think should be there rather than what was there. But again, Henry Brown, who was the first custodian of Stonehenge, he interviewed Richard Hickley, who was the steward who managed the estate. You know, he indicates that nothing like that was found and that there's something more fundamental going on.
Now, the idea became even more interesting when a story from 1793 emerged. James Douglas suggested a whale bone had been found. Maybe even Drax himself had suspected that this could have been a whale bone.
Now, that in itself is interesting because he obviously thinks that that's from before the flood, because it's a whale bone, but it's not. It turns out to be what is described as a slip of wood.
And then in 1846, the Reverend Edward Duke proposed something surprisingly modern. Perhaps this timber wasn't a relic, perhaps it wasn't ceremonial, perhaps it had been part of the construction process itself. Now that might not sound remarkable, but at the time we of course assumed that they were looking for kings, for burial tombs, for you name it, all kinds of wonderful treasures. But maybe now as we move forward with these, we're starting to realise that we're asking the wrong question. Not what was buried inside Silbury Hill, but how was Silbury Hill constructed? Merewether's tunnel never produced the definitive answer people were hoping for, but it changed the conversation. And in the century that followed, another excavation would take place, another tunnel in from the side, determined to find the answers to Silbury Hill. This time though, we now have modern archaeology, and we also have television cameras.
By drilling from the top and at points on the side.
By the 1960s, people had been digging into Silbury Hill for almost 200 years and asking all those same questions. But this time will be different. We're now led by an archaeologist called Richard Atkinson. By then, Atkinson was already one of Britain's best-known archaeologists, closely associated with excavations at Stonehenge. And if anyone was going to solve the mystery of Silbury Hill, Atkinson is your man. Now, like Merewether before, he decided that he was going to tunnel in from the side. Every stage was recorded, studied, and perhaps more importantly, filmed for the BBC Chronicle programme. For the first time, millions of people could watch the search unfold. And once again, expectations were high. Well, if solving the mystery of Silbury Hill was on the agenda, well, getting to the heart of Silbury Hill would, of course, give us the answer we wanted. At least that was what Atkinson thought. But as the story went on and as he buried further into the tunnel, once again the story started to change.
One of the things that we didn't know was that the hole was there all the time, that the summit continued to collapse. The pity of it is that members of the public who lived locally, told Richard Atkinson about this in 1968-69. He just sort of ignored it, but it's in the file, so...
Atkinson's work led to the influential idea that Silbury had been constructed in a series of major phases. And maybe those 3 phases aren't exactly how we see it today, perhaps more of a continued process over generations. Well, for a while it seemed like now archaeology had solved the mystery that the antiquarians of old could never come close to doing. Well, the tunnels had reached the centre, and of course for them, well, I guess the mystery was solved. There was no mystery, at least that's what they thought. Because hidden within the mound was evidence Atkinson never had the opportunity to see, and 30 years later, past Silbury Hill collapsed, archaeologists would find themselves back inside the tunnels once again, not searching for answers, but trying to save the monument itself.
It took a little while for this to register with me. Apparently a European tourist had found a hole in the top of Silbury. Eventually the message got through to Nigel Curtin. Nigel went out to investigate and rang me. There was evidence of shall we say, a jagged crack in the summit, but Nigel Curtin and his wife had lowered a camera into the hole. The photograph shows what looks like a lift shaft, and it's the original shaft excavated by Edward Drax in 1776.
What followed was never intended to be another excavation, it was a rescue operation. So over the following years, well, archaeologists tried to understand some of those tunnels better than they ever had done before, from historical notes to actual archaeology itself, but also to try and save it, fill it in, backfill those tunnels and stop it from further collapse. And in a bizarre twist, well, in doing that, in trying to save Silbury, well, that actually gave us some of the best results we've ever seen. Buried turf, preserved plant remains, ancient grass seeds allowed archaeologists to radiocarbon date different stages of the monument's construction with far greater precision than ever before. Now, although that's not necessarily the actual pinnacle of modern understanding of Silbury Hill, we still see those 3 phases as important, but for me, I've recently been convinced that perhaps that final phase, the last phase we see that made it as big as we see it today, well, that one was just a continued process of re-whitening, re-chalking that monument for whatever reason. And the bizarrest twist of all of this story is perhaps for me the fact that those tunnels that were dug into it, the shafts that it's been littered with over the last 250 years, they tried to solve it but they never did. And in fact it was the reassuring of those tunnels, it was the filling in that gave us the final clue and understanding exactly how it was built, and perhaps gave us some more clues of exactly what that was for. I've been Paul, I'll see you this time next week.